맛은 달콤해 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 오렌지는 상큼해 상큼해 상큼해.
So, good day everyone. So, I am Roxanne Siluxin, and now I am going to discuss our final examination in advanced statistics. So, the number one question is, what is the null hypothesis in hypothesis testing? So, the null hypothesis in hypothesis testing is a statement that proposes that there is no significant or statistical significance between a set of a given observation. So, and it states that no effect, which is essentially claims that any observed difference or relationship is due to chance or random variation. So, as you can see in our options, the option B is the correct answer, which is a statement that there is no effect or no difference. So, number 3, what is the significance level in hypothesis testing? So, the significance level in hypothesis testing is the probability of rejecting the null hypothesis when it is true. Then, number 4 is if p-value is less than alpha, what is the correct decision? So, the correct decision for that is to reject the null hypothesis. So the correct answer is letter B. Then we have number 5. What is a type 1 error in hypothesis testing? So in type 1 error in hypothesis testing is rejecting the null hypothesis when it is true. So the correct answer for that is letter B. Then number 6. What is a type 2 error in hypothesis testing? So the type 2 error in hypothesis testing is to failing to reject the null hypothesis when it is true. Then we have number 7. What does the p-value represent in hypothesis testing? So the p-value represent in hypothesis testing is the probability of obtaining the observed result, or more extreme, if a hypothesis is true. So the correct answer for that is letter B. Number 8 is, what is the critical value in hypothesis testing? So the critical value in hypothesis testing is a value that determines the threshold for rejecting null hypothesis. So that's the option A. Number 9 is, which test is appropriate for comparing the means of two independent groups? So the test is appropriate for comparing the means of two independent groups is two sample t-test. So that's in option B. The number 10 is, which test is appropriate for comparing the means of the same group measured twice? So the test is appropriate for that is paired t-test. So that's in option C. Then, number 11, which of the following is true about a two-tailed test? So, as you can see in the 4 options, the true about a two-tailed test is in option B, which is a test for differences in both directions. The number 12, what does the power of a hypothesis test measure? So, it measures the probability of correctly rejecting the null hypothesis. So, that's in option C. Then we have number 13, which of the following increases the power of a t-test? I mean the test. So, as you can see in the 4 options, only the option D is which is using a one-tailed test instead of a two-tailed test increases the power of a test. Then we have number 14. What is the test statistic in hypothesis testing? So the test statistic in hypothesis testing is a measure of how extreme the sample data is under null hypothesis. So that's in option A. Then we have number 15. Which test is appropriate for testing the association between two categorical variables? Note there that there's a word categorical. It means it's chi-square test. So that's in option C. Since a chi-square, it measures the categorical variables. Then we have number 16. When should one sample t-test be used? So one sample t-test be used to compare the mean of one sample to a known population mean. So that's in option A. Then we have number 17. What is the decision rule in hypothesis testing? So the decision rule in hypothesis testing is a criterion for rejecting or failing to reject null hypothesis based on the test statistic and critical value. So that's in option B. With number 18 is which of the following is not an assumption of parametric hypothesis. So as you can see in the following options, in the four options, only the option C is not an assumption of parametric hypothesis, which is the data are measured on a nominal scale. Then we have number 19. If the sample size increases, what happens to the standard error? So if the sample size increases, the standard error will be decreases. So that's in option B. And then we have number 20, what is the relationship between confidence intervals and hypothesis testing? So the relationship between the two is if the confidence interval exclude the population parameter, null hypothesis is rejected. So that's in option B. So test B, which is the z-test. So number 21, what is the primary purpose of a z-test? So the primary purpose of a z-test is to compare sample means to a known population mean. So that's in option B. So number 22, which of the following is a requirement for using a z-test? So the requirement for using z-test is the population standard deviation must be known. So that's in option C. Then we have number 23. What is the null hypothesis for a one sample z-test? So the null hypothesis for a one sample z-test is the sample mean equals the population mean. So that's in option B. Then we have number 24. When conducting a two-tailed z-test, what are you testing? So if you're conducting two-tailed z-test, you are testing if the sample mean is different from the population mean. So that's in option C. Then we have number 25. What is the critical z-value for a two-tailed test at a 5% significance level? So that's in option B, which is positive negative 1.96. Then number 26. In a z-test, what does the z-score represent? So z-score represent in z-test the number of standard deviation sample mean is from the population mean. So that's in option C. Then we have number 27. What formula is used to calculate the z-score in a one sample z-test? So as you can see, the option B is the correct formula for a one sample z-test. Then we have number 28. What does a p-value less than the significance level indicate in a z-test? So it indicates to reject the null hypothesis. So that's in option B. Then we have number 29. Which of the following is not an assumption of the z-test? So as you can see in the four options, only the letter C is not an assumption of the z-test, which is the population variance is unknown. Then we have number 30. A researcher conducts a z-test and obtains a z-score of 2.5. What does this mean? So it means that the sample mean is 2.5 standard deviations above the population. So that's in option B. Then we have number 31. What is the critical z-value for a one-tailed test at a 1% significance level? So the answer for that is letter C, which is positive negative 2.33. Then we have number 32. What is the standard error of the mean used for in a z-test? So the correct answer for that is letter B, to calculate the z-score. Then we have number 33. In a two-sample z-test, what is the null hypothesis? So, the null hypothesis in the two-sample z-test is the means of the two populations are equal. So, that's in option A. Then we have number 34. What does a high z-score indicate? So it indicates the sample mean is far from the population mean. So that's in option B. Then we have number 35. Which test would you use if the population standard deviation is unknown? So are you going to use t-test if if you test the if your standard deviation is unknown, so you're going to use the statistical tool, which is the t-test. Then we have number 36. What is the relationship between confidence level and significance level in a z-test? So the relationship between the two is confidence level is equal to 1 negative significance level. So that's in option A. Then we have 37. What type of data is required for a z-test? So the data required for a z-test the data must be interval or ratio data. So that's in option C. Then we have number 38. If a z-score falls within the critical region, what decision should be made? So, decision you will be made, you must reject the null hypothesis if the z-score falls within the critical region. Then we have number 39. How does sample size affect z-test? So the sample size affect the z-test. A larger sample size decreases by a larger sample size decreases the standard error. So that's in option A. Then we have number 40. Which of the following scenarios is appropriate for a two-sample z-test? So the following scenarios, as you can see in the four options, that is appropriate for a two-sample z-test is in option B, which is comparing the means of two samples with known population standard deviation. Test C, which is t-test. So number 41. What is the primary purpose of a t-test? So the primary purpose of a t-test is to test the difference between two means. So that is the purpose of a t-test. Next, number 42, which of the following is not a type of t-test? So as you can see in the options, in the four options, the following are all type of a t-test except one. So in the option C, which is the chi-square t-test, is not a type of a t-test. Number 43. What is the null hypothesis in a t-test? So the null hypothesis in a t-test is the means of two groups are equal. So that's in option A. The number 44. When is a paired samples t-test used? When is a paired samples t-test used? So it used when to compare the means of the same group before and after the treatment. So that is on option B. So number 45. What is a key assumption of the independent samples t-test? So the key assumption of the independent sample t-test is the variances of the two groups are equal. So that's in option B. Number 46, as you can see, the options are in formula. So what is the formula for the t statistic in one sample t-test? So the formula for the t statistic in a one sample t-test is in option A, which is t is equal to mean minus mu over sample all over square root of n. So that is a formula for the t statistic. Number 47 is if the calculated t statistic is 2.5 and the critical t value is 2.0, what should to conclude? So based on the statement, we can conclude to reject the null hypothesis, which is in the option A. So number 48 is a one sample t-test is conducted to test whether the mean of a sample, which is 50, and the sample mean is 52, the standard deviation is 4, and the sample size is 16. So what is the t statistic? So using the a formula of the t statistic, we can we can obtain the result, which is 2.0, which is in option B. Next, number 49 is in an independent sample t-test, how are degrees of freedom calculated? So, to calculate the degrees of freedom in an independent sample t-test, we just add two samples and subtract it by 2. So, which is in option B, n sub 1 plus n sub 2 minus 2. Then number 50, if the p-value in a t-test is 0.03, what does this indicate at a 5% significance level? So it indicates that to reject the null hypothesis, which is in option B. Number 51 is which t-test is appropriate to compare the means of two independent groups? So all options are is t-test a statistical tool, right? So which appropriate to compare the means of two independent groups? So it is in option C, which is independent sample t-test. So number 52 is what is the purpose of a one sample t-test? So the purpose of it is to compare the mean of a single sample to a known value or population mean. Number 53 is in a paired samples t-test, the test statistic is based on the difference between paired observations. Number 54 is what assumption is unique to the independent samples t-test compared to the paired samples t-test. So it is option C, which is independence of samples. Yes. So that is the assumption, a unique assumption of independent sample t-test compared to the paired samples t-test. So number 55 is if Levin's test for equality of variances gives a significant result, what should you do? So you should do, you just use the t-test result that assume unequal variances. So that's in option B. Number 56 is what does it mean if the 95% confidence interval for a t-test includes 0? So it means that the null hypothesis is not rejected. So that is in option B. So number 57 is in an independent samples t-test, a larger sample size will, again, if the independent sample t-test, in an independent sample t-test, a larger sample size will decrease the standard error. So that is option B. Number 58 is what does a significant result in a paired sample t-test indicate? So it indicates that there is a significant difference between the means of paired observation. Number 59 is what is the main difference between a t-test and a z-test? So the main difference between the two is when we say t-test, it used for small sample sizes or unknown population variance. While on the other hand, the z-test is used for large samples with known population variance. So that is the difference between a t-test and the z-test. So that's in option B. Number 60 is which of the following is a limitation of a t-test? So in option B, it assumes normality of the data, which is the limitation of a t-test. So letter in test D, we have the ANOVA. So number 61, what does ANOVA test for? So ANOVA will use or to test for is to in difference between means of 3 or more groups. So that's in option C. Next, in number 62, what type or which type of ANOVA is used when you have one independent variable with more than 2 levels? So if that case, if you have one independent variable and the type of ANOVA you are going to use if you have one independent variable with more than two levels. The type of ANOVA you are going to use is one-way ANOVA. So that's in option A. Then we have number 63. What is the null hypothesis in ANOVA? So the null hypothesis in ANOVA is all group means are equal. So that is the null hypothesis of ANOVA. Then we have number 63. What does a significant F ratio in ANOVA indicate? So indicates that at least one group mean is different. So that's in option B. Number 65 is what does the F statistic represent in ANOVA? So the F statistic represent in ANOVA by a ratio of between group variances to within group variance. So that's the what does the F statistic represent in ANOVA. Then we have number 66, which assumption is not required for ANOVA. So as you can see in all options, in the four options, all are required for ANOVA. Those are the assumptions required for ANOVA, but there's still option there that is not required. So which is not? So option D, which is equal sample sizes in all groups, is assumption that is not required for ANOVA. Then number 67 is what post hoc test is commonly used in ANOVA to find which groups differ? So it's in option B, which is Storkis HSD. So that is the post hoc test that is commonly used in ANOVA to find with which groups differ. Number 68 is what does the between group variance in ANOVA represent? So it represent that the variability due to differences between group means. So that's in option B. Next is number 69. What does the within group variance in ANOVA represent? So it represents the variability within each group. So that's in option B. So number 70 is in a two-way ANOVA, how many independent variables are there? So from the word two. So the independent variables are there is 2. So that's in option B. Number 71 is what is the purpose of a two-way ANOVA? So the purpose of a two-way ANOVA is to test the interaction between two independent variables. So that's in option B. Number 72 is which of the following is true about repeated measures ANOVA? So in option B, it is required the assumption of sphericity. So that is the true about repeated measures of ANOVA. Number 73 is what is the total sum of squares in ANOVA? So the total sum squares in ANOVA is sum of between group and within sum of squares. Number 74 is which software is commonly used for ANOVA analysis? So option A to C are the software that you can use for ANOVA analysis. So all of those are useful for ANOVA analysis, the SPSS, the Excel, and the R. So the correct answer is letter D, all of these. The number 75 is what does the p-value in ANOVA indicate? So it indicates, the p-value in ANOVA indicates that the probability of observing the F ratio by chance. So number 76 is what is the assumption of sphericity in repeated measures ANOVA? So the assumption of sphericity in repeated measures ANOVA is equality of covariances among pairs of repeated measures. So that's in option B. Number 77, we have When is a MANOVA used instead of ANOVA? So we can use MANOVA when there are multiple dependent variables. Since ang ANOVA is, you can use that one in if there's only one dependent variable. Next is 78. What happens if the assumptions of ANOVA are violated? So, if the assumptions of ANOVA are violated, the result may become unreliable. So, that's in option B. Number 79 is, what is the alternative to ANOVA when assumptions are violated? So the alternative of ANOVA is Kruskal-Wallis test. So that's in option A. Number 80 is, what does a large F value in ANOVA suggest? So it suggests that the means of the groups are very different. So that's in option B. Then we have test E, Pearson moment correlation. So number 81 is, what does the Pearson correlation coefficient measure? So it measures the strength and direction of a linear relationship between two variables. Number 82 is, what is the range of the Pearson correlation coefficient? So it ranges from -1 to +1. So that's in option B. Number 83 is a Pearson correlation of 0.8 indicates a strong negative relationship since it is -0.8. So it indicates that a strong negative relationship. Number 84. So what is the null hypothesis in Pearson correlation? So the null hypothesis in Pearson correlation is the correlation coefficient is equal to 0. So that's in option C. Number 85 is which of the following assumptions is not required for Pearson correlation? So all options are the assumption of Pearson correlation, and the option there that is not required for Pearson correlation is option C, which is the data are ordinal. So number 86 is, what does a Pearson correlation coefficient of 0 mean? So it means that no linear relationship. So that's in option B. Number 87 is, what is the formula for Pearson correlation? So as you can see in option A is the formula for Pearson correlation, which is R is equal to covariance of X and Y, then the variance of X times the variance of Y. So that is the formula for Pearson correlation. Number 88 is, what does a positive Pearson correlation indicate? So the positive Pearson correlation indicates that both variables move in the same direction. So that's in option B. Next, number 89 is, if R is equal to 0.25, the relationship between variables is weak and negative since R is equal to -0.25. So it's weak and negative. So that's in option B. Number 90 is, what is the squared value of the Pearson correlation coefficient called? So it's called coefficient of determination. That is the squared value of the Pearson correlation coefficient. So number 91 is, the coefficient of determination, or R squared, explain that the proportion of variance in one variable explained by the other. So that's in option A. So number 92 is, what type of variables are suitable for Pearson correlation? So the type of variables that are suitable for Pearson correlation is the continuous variables. Number 93 is if the Pearson correlation is calculated between height and weight, the value of R is equal to 0.8 it indicates that height and weight are strongly positive related. So that's in option B. Then we have number 94. Which of the following scenarios violates an assumption of Pearson correlation? So the following scenarios that violates an assumption of Pearson correlation is in option B, which is one variable is ordinal and the other is continuous. Then number 95, what does a scatter plot of two variables with R is equal to 1 look like? So it looks like a perfectly diagonal straight line with a positive slope. So that's an option B. Next is number 96. When is Pearson correlation not appropriate? So the Pearson correlation not appropriate when there is a nonlinear relationship. So that's in option A. Then we have number 97. What is the relationship between covariance and Pearson correlation? So the relationship between the two is Pearson correlation is the standardized version of covariance. So that's in option A. Then we have number 98. Which software can compute Pearson correlation? So as you can see, all options can compute Pearson correlation. So the correct answer is letter D, which is all of this. Then number 99, if R is equal to 0.98, what can be inferred? So it can be inferred that the variables have a very strong positive relationship. So that's in option C. Then we have number 100. What does the sign of the Pearson correlation coefficient indicate? So it indicates that the direction of the relationship. Yes, that's the direction of the relationship. So that's in option C. Then we have the test F, which is the regression analysis. So 101, what is the primary purpose of regression analysis? So its primary purpose is to predict the value of a dependent variable based on one or more independent variables. So that's in option C. Then we have 102. What is the dependent variable in regression analysis? So the dependent variable in regression analysis is the variable being predicted or explained. So that's in option A. Then we have 103. Which of the following is not an assumption of linear regression? So the following that is not assumption of linear regression is in option C, which is multicollinearity among predictors. Then we have 104. What is the role of the regression coefficient in a linear regression model? So the role of the regression coefficient in a linear regression model is option B, which is it indicates the slope of the regression line. Then we have 105. What does the intercept represent in a linear regression equation? So it represents that the predicted value of the dependent variable when all independent variables are 0. So it's an option B. Then we have 106. So the equation for a simple linear regression model is y is equal to 2 plus 3x. If x is equal to 4, what is y? So all you have to do is to substitute the value of x and simplify. Then we can get the value of 14. So that's in option C. Then number 107. If the coefficient of determination is 0.85, what does this indicate? So it indicates that 85% of the variation in the independent variable is explained by the independent variable. So that's in option A. Then we have 108. What is the formula for the residual in regression analysis? So that's in option A, which is y observed times y predicted. Then we have 109. A multiple regression model has 4 independent variables. So the number of predictors in the model is 4. So that's in option B. Then we have 110. Which of the following tests is used to determine whether the overall regression model is statistically significant? So the test that is used to determine whether the overall regression model is statistically significant is the ANOVA or the F test. So that's in option C. Then we have 111. What does multicollinearity mean in regression analysis? So it means that a situation where independent variables are highly correlated with each other. So that's in option A. Then we have 112. What should you do if multicollinearity is detected in a regression model? So all you have to do is to remove or combine highly correlated independent variables. So that's in option A. Then we have 113. What is the difference between the simple and multiple regression? So the difference between the two is when we say simple regression, it has one dependent and one independent variable, while the multiple regression has more than one independent variable. So that's in option A. Then we have 114. Which of the following is an example of categorical independent variable? So the example of that is the gender. So that's in option C. Then we have 115. What does heteroscedasticity in regression analysis imply? So it implies that residuals have an equal variance. So that's in option B. Then next is which regression method is best suited for predicting a binary outcome? So the regression method that is best suited for predicting a binary outcome is logistic regression. So that's in option C. Then we have 120. What does an adjusted R squared account for in a regression model? So that's in option A, which is addition of irrelevant predictors to the model. Next is the test G, which is the chi-square test. So 121, what is the purpose of the chi-square test? So its purpose is to test the association between categorical variables. Then we have 122 rather, what type of data is required for a chi-square test? So it requires, so the data must be categorical. So that's in option C. Then we have if the chi-square statistic is 10.8 and the critical value is 8 per the critical value at 5% significance level is 9.49. What should you conclude? So you should reject the null hypothesis. So that's in option A. Then we have 130. Which software can be used to perform a chi-square test? So as you can see, all of the options can be performed a chi-square test. So that's in option D, which is all of these. Then we have 131. What does a significant chi-square test for independence indicate? So it indicates that the variables are dependent. So that's in option C. Then we have 132. What is the null hypothesis for a chi-square test of independence? So the answer for that is the variables are independent. So it's an option A. Then we have 133. When conducting a chi-square goodness of fit test, the null hypothesis states that the observed frequencies match expected frequencies. So that's in option A. Then we have 134. In which scenario would you use a chi-square goodness of fit test? So as you can see in the options, the four options, the option B is the scenario that you are going, would you use a chi-square goodness of fit test that to test the distribution of a single categorical variable. Then we have 135. If the p-value of a chi-square test is 0.03, what does this imply at a 5% significance level? So it implies that it rejects the null hypothesis. So that's in option B. Then we have 136. Which of the following represent a contingency table? So it represents that a table showing joint frequencies of two categorical variables. So that's in option B. Then we have 137. A chi-square test for independence requires which type of sampling? So it requires the type of sampling that is simple random sampling. So that's in option B. Then we have 138. What happens if one or more expected frequencies are less than 5? So if one or more expected frequencies are less than 5, So it can be, you can use the future exact test, you can combine categories, or you can increase the sample size. So the correct answer is in letter D, which is any of these. Then we have 139. If a researcher conducts a chi-square test with a p-value of 0.10, what should they conclude at a 5% significance level? So you can conclude, fail to reject the null hypothesis. So that's in option B. Next is 140. Which of the following is a limitation of the chi-square test? So as you can see in the four options, the option C is the limitation of the chi-square test, which is it assumes all expected frequencies are greater than or equal to 5. Then we have the test H, which is non-parametric test. So 141, what is the non-parametric test? So when we say non-parametric test, it tests that makes no assumption about the underlying distribution of data. So that's in option B. Then we have 142, which of the following is not a non-parametric test? So as you can see in the four options, the statistical tool that's not a non-parametric test is the Pearson's correlation. So that's in option C. Then we have 143, when you should use a non-parametric test. So we should use a non-parametric test when the data does not meet the assumptions of parametric tests. So that's in option B. Then we have the 144, what type of data is typically analyzed using non-parametric tests? So the type of data that is typically analyzed using non-parametric tests is the ordinal or ranked data. So that's in option C. So what is next is 145. What is the main advantage of non-parametric tests over parametric tests? So the correct answer is letter C. So they can be used when the data does not meet parametric assumptions. Then 146 is, which test is used to compare the medians of two independent groups? So you can use the statistical tool to compare the medians of two independent groups, which is the Mann-Whitney-U test. So that's in option A. Then we have 147. The Wilcoxon sign rank test is used for comparing paired or matched samples. So that's in option B. Then we have 148. What is the non-parametric equivalent of the paired t-test? So the non-parametric equivalent of the paired t-test is the Wilcoxon sign rank test, which is on option C. Then we have 149. Which non-parametric test is used to compare more than two independent groups? So we can use the statistical tool, which is the Kruskal-Wallis test. So that's in option B. Then we have 150. What is the purpose of the Friedman test? So its purpose is to test differences between three or more dependent groups. So that's in option B. Then we have 151. If you are using the Mann-Whitney-U test, what is the test statistic based on? So it's based on ranks of scores from two independent groups. So that's in option B. Then we have the 152. The null hypothesis in the Kruskal-Wallis test states that all group medians are equal. So that's in option B. Then we have 153. A researcher conducts a chi-square test of independence and obtains a p-value of 0.02. What should they conclude at a 5% significance level? So they can conclude at a 5% in significance level to reject the null hypothesis. So that's in option B. Then we have 154. In the Wilcoxon sign rank test, the test statistic is calculated using the sum of ranks of positive and negative differences. So that's in option A. Then we have 155. Which of the following tests would you use to analyze the relationship between two categorical variables? So you can use the statistical tool as the chi-square test of independence. So that's in option B. Then we have 156. If the p-value for a Mann-Whitney-U test is 0.15, what should you conclude? So you should conclude to fail to reject the null hypothesis. So that's in option B. Then we have 157. What does it mean if a Kruskal-Wallis test results in a significant p-value? So it means that at least one group median is different from the other. So that's in option A. Then we have the Friedman test is significant when the dependent groups have have differing medians. So that's in option B. So 159 is, what is the chi-square goodness of fit test used for? So the chi-square goodness of fit test used for to compare observed data to expected data for a single categorical value. So that's in option A. And then we have 160. Which of the following is the limitation of non-parametric tests? So the limitation of non-parametric tests is they are less powerful than parametric tests for large samples. So that's in option B. Then we have 161. What is a major difference between parametric and non-parametric tests? So the difference between the two is when we say non-parametric tests are less affected by outliers than parametric tests. So that's in option B. Then we have 162. Which non-parametric test is used as an alternative to the one-way ANOVA? So the statistical tool that is alternative to the one-way ANOVA is the Kruskal-Wallis test. So that's in option B. Then we have 163. Which assumption is not required for non-parametric tests? So the following are all required for non-parametric tests and there is only one is not. So the option D is not required for non-parametric tests, which is normal distribution of the data. Then we have 164. In what situation would you use the Spearman-Rank correlation instead of Pearson correlation? So you are going to use the Spearman-Rank correlation instead of Pearson correlation when the data are ordinal or not normally distributed. So that's in option B. Then we have 165. What is the null hypothesis for the chi-square test of independence? So the null hypothesis of that statistical tool is the two variables are independent. So that's in option A. Then we have 166. Which test is appropriate for comparing the distribution of a single categorical variable to expected frequency? So the appropriate for comparing the distribution of a single categorical variable to expected frequencies is the chi-square goodness of fit test. Then we have 167. The null hypothesis for the Mann-Whitney U test states that the two groups have equal medians. So that's in option B. Then we have 168. Which non-parametric test is used for repeated measures or matched groups? So Friedman test is the non-parametric test that you are going to use for repeated measure or matched groups. So that's in option A. Then we have 169. What is the primary differences between the Wilcoxon rank sum test and the Mann-Whitney U test? So the primary difference between the two is they are essentially the same but calculated differently. So that's in option B. Then we have 170. What does a significant Spearman-Rank correlation indicate? So it indicates that a monotonic relationship between two variables. So that's in option B. So number 172, in the Kruskal-Wallis test, the test statistic is calculated using the option B is the correct answer, which is the mean rank for each group. So we are using mean rank for each group in testing statistic in the Kruskal-Wallis test. So 173 is a Mann-Whitney U test is used to compare two independent groups. So the U statistic is 8 and the critical value is 10 at a 5% significance level. So what should you conclude? So in that, we should conclude to reject the null hypothesis. So that's in option A. Then we have 174. Which of the following tests is appropriate for testing if observed frequency match expected frequency? So if that, the statistical tool appropriate for that is the chi-square goodness of fit test. So that's in option C. Then we have, if a p-value for a Friedman test is 0.001, what does this imply at a 5% significance level? So it implies that at least one group median is significantly different. So that's in option B. Then we have 176. What does a significant result in the Kruskal-Wallis test indicate? So it indicates that at least one group differs in its distribution or median. So that's in option B. Then we have 177. What is the primary purpose of the Wilcoxon sign rank test? So, of course, the primary purpose of the Wilcoxon sign rank test is to compare paired observation for differences. So, that's in option B. Then we have 178. A researcher is analyzing the ranks of test scores in two independent groups. So, which test should they use? So, the test that they should use is the Mann-Whitney U test. So, that's in option B. Then we have the 179. If the p-value for a Spearman rank correlation is 0.045 at a 5% significance level, what does this indicate? So this indicate there's a significant monotonic relationship. So that's in option B. So what is monotonic relationship? So when we see monotonic relationship, it is a scenario where the size of a one variable consistently increases or decreases as the other variable also increases or decreases. So that is monotonic relationship. Then we have the last item. We have 180. Number 180. What is the null hypothesis in the chi-square goodness of fit test? So, the null hypothesis in the chi-square goodness of fit test is the observed and expected frequencies are the same. So that's in option A. So it assumes that there is no significant difference between the observed and expected values. So the correct answer is in option A. So that's all for the advanced statistic.